Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and a couple of weeks ago I did a video about all of the cool applications I'm running on my Synology NAS device, but what I didn't show you was how I installed those applications, most of which were running in Docker containers. And the reason why I didn't do that was because I was still learning how to get things working reliably, but also because Synology had just shifted over their OS to DSM 7.2. And that introduced an entirely new Docker utility called Container Manager, and I was still getting my arms around it, but now I think I've got it largely figured out. So in this video, we're going to look at using Container Manager to install an application called Wallabag. And Wallabag is very similar to Instapaper or Pocket, where you give it a URL of an article and it goes out and downloads and archives that article on your Synology NAS and provides a really nice and slick reading interface so that you can read the article, bookmark where you last left off, and be able to access that article across multiple devices. And the best part is that it's something that you have under your direct control. You're not giving that URL to a cloud server somewhere. It resides completely on your own hardware using this Docker container. And what I like about Wallabag for this example is that it has to install multiple containers in order for it to work. And it is a little finicky, like most of these Docker projects are. So it's a good example, I think, to get your arms around the complexities sometimes of installing Docker containers. Now, before we get into this, I do want to let you know, in the interest of full disclosure, that the Synology NAS devices we're looking at today were provided free of charge to the channel by Synology for some of my prior reviews. They are also an occasional sponsor here on the channel. I do tutorial videos for them, but they are not sponsoring this video. So all of the opinions you're about to hear are my own, and they are not reviewing or approving what you're about to see before it was uploaded. So let's get into it now and see how we can get this application running on our NAS. Now, in order for this to work, you do need to have Container Manager running on your Synology NAS, of course. You can find it in the Package Center. This does require DSM 7.2, and you also need usually one of the Plus series NAS devices that are running with an Intel or AMD processor. I would also suggest upgrading the RAM on that NAS, especially if you want to run a number of containers simultaneously. As we found in my last video, some of the more lower-end Plus models like this one don't get too finicky about the type of RAM that you put in. So we did upgrade the RAM on the NAS we're going to be demoing today to 16 gigabytes, just using off-the-shelf laptop memory. Synology doesn't recommend that, of course. Some of the upper models might give you a bit of a warning message about doing it, but it does work, at least for my purposes, and that is one way to more economically upgrade the RAM so you can fit more containers on your device. Another thing I would suggest installing is the text editor. And what's handy about this is that it allows you to edit the configuration files using the Synology's web-based control panel, so you don't have to jump back and forth between the Synology control panel and your computer's operating system. It's a handy little text editor, and as you'll see in a few minutes, it will also give us color coding for the context of the files that we'll be working on. And I found it to be a very slick little tool that runs right inside your web browser. So let's get to it now and get this application up and running on the NAS. Now you can head over to wallabag.org and download this if you are looking to install it in a different way. But what we're looking for is what's called a Docker Compose file, and I found the quickest way to get to that is just a simple Google search here. So I'm going to hit enter there, and as you can see, I'm being brought to a page on GitHub that has a sample Docker Compose here that we're going to work with. And this is basically a script that will set up our Docker container and download all the dependencies. And it's a very good way to start. Now, prior versions of the Docker application on the Synology NAS did not support Docker Compose files, so you had to install something different to work with those files or work off the command line. But now that the Container Manager has support for Compose files, we can do things a lot more efficiently right within the web interface. Now, I know a lot of you who work with Docker prefer the command line approach, but for me, I really wanted to understand this better, and Container Manager helped me understand things. So at some point, I might switch over to a command line, but for now, I'm able to do some cool stuff here using the new Container Manager software. Now, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to change this file, and I'll show you why in a minute, but I'm going to grab the text here of the example file and put it in my clipboard. And I'm going to go back over to my Synology NAS and load up that handy little text editor. I'm going to go to File and New, and I'm just going to paste everything in. And I will save this in a second, but I can now get at that file and start editing it for our purposes here. Now, before I save this document, what we need to do on the NAS is set up a folder for the files that this container is going to generate. So when you set up Container Manager, you're going to get a folder here called Docker. And what I'm going to do inside of my Docker folder is create a folder for Wallabag so that we can have a place for all of those files to live. And what I love about running Synology as my Docker host is that when my Hyper backup runs to back everything up, it grabs all the files inside of that Docker folder and backs them up. So if I ever had something happen to the NAS, I can very easily rebuild everything and have my status go right back to where it was before the incident happened. And that's one of the reasons why I like working with Synology. It's just very easy to keep everything backed up and functional. So now that we have that folder created here, what I'm going to do now is save this file. So I'm going to go to Save As. I'm going to go into Wallabag. I'm going to call this Compose YAML. Let me give you a look at that. You can really call it whatever you want, and I'll show you why that is in a minute. But this is typically the convention that is used on Docker Compose files. And I'm going to click on Save here. And as you can see now, we've got that Compose YAML file inside of the Wallabag folder. And you'll also see that the context here now is giving us some colors so we know what we're looking at and what we're working with. So now that we've got all this stuff set up, let's take a look now at some of the things we need to change in this Compose file so that we can get this container booted up right the first time. All right, so let's get to work here. And what I'm focusing in on first is this environment section here. Now, this configuration is, of course, specific to Wallabag. Every project you install handles their configuration variables differently. So some, like Wallabag here, will put everything into the environment section of the Compose file. Others might require a separate configuration file. I have found in almost all cases, a good project will have good documentation along with it to help guide you through the process. So you really do need to spend some time looking at those instructions to take everything step by step. But I picked this project specifically because it's all contained in the Compose file, and it's a great way to start to kind of get your arms around things. Now for this demo, I'm just going to leave just about everything at the default that I don't have to change. But if you were setting this up yourself, you might want to have a different MySQL root password set up here. You might also want to have a different database password set up here as well. So these are things that you can, of course, change. A couple of other things I'm going to adjust here because I don't need them is the email function that this has. So I'm actually just going to blow away this variable for the mailer and the from email. So we're going to take those two things out of the mix here. I'm going to change the domain name to the domain name of the server that we're running this on, the Synology NAS that we're running this on. And as many of you know, I use Tailscale as my VPN, and they have a really handy way of using regular names for your Tailscale address. So that's what we're going to put in here. So my particular Synology NAS here is called DS723+. And so what I'm going to do here is just type in that Tailscale address along with the port that I'm going to be running Wallabag on, which is going to be 8082. You can choose any port you want, provided the Synology NAS isn't already using that port. If you do have a port conflict, it won't allow this to get built. But I know 8082 is free on this NAS, so that's what we're going to use. And then for the server name, you can call this whatever you want. I'm just going to call it Lonbag here, so let's just call it that. And then we're going to go over to the port section here, and I'm going to get rid of those quotation marks. And what I'm going to do here is type in 8082:80. And what this is going to do is map all of the traffic coming to the container over port 8082 to port 80, which is what the container will be listening for incoming connections on. So that's the first thing we're going to change there. The next thing we need to change is this section here for volumes, because right now it's pointing at a directory that isn't going to be accessible on this particular Synology NAS. And this is a big thing that trips up a lot of people. So what you have to do is provide the full file location for your Docker folder in order for these things to build properly. So my volume on my NAS is called volume 1. I would say in most cases that's probably what your Synology NAS's volume is called. We're going to then type in Docker here for that Docker folder, and then we're going to have it go to Wallabag. But you're going to see here that there's also images, and what we need to do manually here is create the images folder inside of that Wallabag folder so that these things can get put in the right place. I'm going to jump into Wallabag here. You can see our compose file, and I'm just going to create a folder called images. So that part is done. I'm going to leave this health check on here, and the reason is that this particular project goes through some really funky stuff when it first starts up. It takes it a really long time to configure itself for the first run. So what it does is it often reloads the container for the application multiple times until the database is done getting itself set up. So we're going to leave health check on here so that we can kind of set it and forget it. You're also going to notice here that this container depends on two other containers, and they call them DB and Redis. DB is a MySQL server that this project is going to install as a separate container. Some projects you encounter might include the database server inside the container, but for many, proper Docker practice is to have associated server applications running in their own containers versus inside the main one. So what's going to happen when we're done with this compose file is that we're actually going to have 3 containers running, which is the main Wallabag application, DB, and Redis, which is a caching server that speeds things up a bit. So here is the image for that, which it's going to grab off of the Docker source that it's looking for on the internet to get the container. And the volume here we're also going to have to update. So we're going to call this again volume 1, Docker. And I'm just going to get rid of that opt thing there. And we're going to have Wallabag, and then we're going to have to add a new folder here called data. So let's create that real quick. So now we've got a data folder and we have an image folder, and these are pointed at these volumes here. So as you can see here, this is the local storage location on the NAS, volume 1 Docker Wallabag data, and this is what it's going to map to inside of the container. The reason why you have to do this is that if you don't map these volumes out, all the data gets stored in the container itself, and then if you go to upgrade or update the container to a new version, it wipes out all your data because it was all inside that container. So basically the things that you are using for your own data get stored outside the container so that when you need to update the container, you basically blow it up and install a fresh copy. But because the files are in place, everything just kind of picks up where it left off. And I'll show you the upgrade process once we get this working. And I think, other than that, I think we are good to go here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. And I'm going to close this out. And now we've got our compose file ready to go. And we're going to go back to Container Manager now. And now I'm going to go over to Project. Now I've got a couple of other projects running here, but we're going to create a new one. And what I like about this is that it will keep all of these containers kind of running together in its own little space here. So we're going to call this Wallabag for our project. For the path, I'm going to select the folder we created Wallabag before. And I'm going to get a warning here saying that there's an existing compose file. And I'm going to click OK here. And as you can see now, this is everything we just edited on the text editor. So you could go ahead and actually create the compose file like we just did in the text editor here, but I found it's easier to get it set up first on the text editor where you've got more screen real estate and get it all going here. So I'm going to click on Next, and I'm going to skip this step. I don't usually enable this feature. And we'll go ahead and click Done and make sure that the project is started once it's created. Now what this is going to do is look at that compose file, and it's going to now pull all of these containers off the internet and get everything set up. And this process does take a little bit of time depending on the project that you're working with. Some containers can be quite large in the gigabytes. This one is not as big, but it will take it a little bit to pull those containers down and get them installed. So why don't we let this thing do its thing, and when it is done with whatever it is doing, we will pick it up from there. So let's take a break, and we'll be back in a second. All right, so we are up and running here. As you can see, we got an exit code of 0, which means that everything was built and started properly. And what's happening in the background now is that Wallabag is getting itself configured and started up. If you get an error here, typically it involves those file mappings that we looked at earlier, or it could be that you have a port conflict. And most of the time you'll get an error in here that will point you in the right direction to fixing things. And what you do is go back in and edit the file and just rebuild the project, and you'll be in good shape. And as I mentioned at the outset, this project is a little finicky in getting started for the first time. So this is a good demonstration of some of the things you can look for to troubleshoot your container should it build properly, but you get errors after it starts up. So again, we've got the orange indicator here on the project. I'm going to click on the project name here. And as you can see here, the Wallabag application is currently not running at all because it's grayed out. It is stopped. So I'm going to jump into this and go over to the log. And what it looks like here, if I go through the log, is that it was waiting for the database to start up, and it didn't start up fast enough, so it just terminated itself. And that's why that health check is in there, because if it detects that it's not running, presumably this will start up on its own again. And I also notice here I've got an orange message here on the database. It says it's unhealthy. And I think the reason is that there were a couple of errors thrown as things were getting created, but it looks like now the database is ready for connections. So what I could do is just kind of wait for Wallabag here to start up again, but what I'm going to do is click on the container here and go over to Start. And this should kickstart things to start working again. And what we'll see here now, because I think the database is ready, is that Wallabag will not die on us again. So we're going to click through Wallabag here real quick and go back to the log. And sure enough, here it's now configuring the MySQL database. And I found in prior iterations of setting up Wallabag that this could take a good 15 or 20 minutes. So what we're going to do here is let this thing do whatever it's doing, and then we'll come back when I think it's ready, and we'll connect into Wallabag and get it up and running. And while we're waiting here for things to configure, I thought I would show you the data folder here. And inside of this, you can see all of the files that are created both by the Wallabag app, but also by that MySQL container. And this is what gets backed up when you go through your usual backup routine. All right, just jump back into the Wallabag application containers log, and it says that Wallabag is ready. That's exciting. So we're going to jump over to another tab. And what I'm going to do here is type in the address that we set up for that NAS. And remember, I'm using Tailscale as my VPN, so I can just type in this address wherever I am in the world with the port number and connect to that system there. So here we go. We are now able to set up our account on Wallabag. And I'm going to register here real quick because I just found a little error that's going to pop up. So let me type in my email address here and try to create this, and I'll show you how we're going to troubleshoot this. All right, so I'm going to register this account that I just set up, and when I click on register, I get an internal server error, and it's looking at port 465. Now remember, when we set up our initial Docker Compose file, I took out all of the email stuff, and what's happening here is that Wallabag is still configured to send an email confirmation out to the user that's creating an account. So what we need to do is jump back to that Compose file and rebuild. So let's take a look and see how to do that. So checking through the documentation on the Wallabag Docker here, you can see there's an option here for confirmation. And I'm going to copy this out here real quick, because by default, confirmation is set to true. So if I set it to false, this should get around that error. So let's jump back over to my NAS. I'm going to right-click on here and open it with the editor. And I'm just going to drop in that new thing right here and keep the formatting. And just type in false so that it's set to false. And we're going to save this. So now we need to stop the entire project and rebuild it, so these settings should take effect. But we shouldn't have to go through the whole process of getting this up and running from scratch again, because all the files are already in place from the initial install that we just got through with. So I'm going to go back here to Project, and I'm going to go to Wallabag here and click on Stop. And once everything is stopped, we'll get an exit code, hopefully, of 0. And then we can go ahead and rebuild everything. All right, everything has stopped successfully. We know this because when we jump back to our project file here, you can see we have a grayed out icon here. And if I jump into the project, you can see that all of the containers have also stopped. Now what I'm going to do is just go and right-click on here and click on Build. And what this is going to do is basically reread that configuration file. It's going to pull the containers down if it needs to do that again, and basically just reconstruct all of the containers, wipe them out and start them from scratch. But again, because all of our files are stored on the NAS in that Docker directory, our data will be safe. And that's one of the beauties of how these containers work. They're relatively portable. And as you can see, everything started up much quicker than it did on a fresh install. I've got a green light here now, and I have a feeling that if we go back to the container and set that user up again, everything's going to work just fine. So let's have at it. All right, so let's go over here to register, and I'm going to type in test@test.com, and we'll just do a little password here and click on register. And what do you know, it looks like now we can go right to our account and get working here with Wallabag. So now we have the application installed. Let's do a quick test now and see if I can pull an article off my website and have it archive itself inside of the app. All right, so here we've got an article from my blog with some text and images in it. What I'm going to do now is grab the URL here at the top. I'm going to go back to Wallabag, and what I'm going to do is just click on the plus icon here and paste that address in and hit enter. And what should happen here is it should pull down that article, and it should give it to us in a readable format. And there you go. This is all happening now on the Synology NAS, not through somebody's cloud server, which I think is awesome. And if I click on the article here, look at that. It's got my video embedded, and it's got all of the article here. And I'm going to leave it like right about here, because what I'm going to do next is get my phone out. And on my phone, I am running the official Wallabag app that you can find on the iOS or Android app stores. And I pointed the app to my Synology through the Tailscale VPN that I set up. And if I click on the article here, it's going to bring me to it, and I can continue reading it here on my phone. And for longer articles, it does a really good job of keeping your place in the article, so it'll kind of bookmark where you last left off when you last read it. And what's nice about all of this is that this is very similar to the functionality you would get with Pocket or Instapaper, but again, it's running locally on a server that you have direct control over, and you don't have to pay a monthly fee or anything else to use it. Now, you will get updates on your containers as time goes on here. As you can see, I've got 5 image updates available for the containers that I'm working with. Now remember, we've been using the project feature here to build these out and kind of organize things, but the updates work a little differently. So if we go over here to details, what you're going to see is all the containers, whether they're in a project or not, that are currently installed on my system. And I'm going to update right now this project here, RSS Hub, which I do have in a project right now. So what I'm going to do is go over to Project. I'm going to select RSS Hub. I'm going to go to Action and Stop. And what this will do is shut down RSS Hub and all of the containers that it is working with. And once everything stops here, what we'll be able to do is update the RSS Hub container. And what that will do is wipe out what's on there now and replace it with a new version. But again, like all the other projects I set up, we have the files stored safely outside of the container. So RSS Hub is now off. I'm going to go to Image here. I'm going to go to RSS Hub here and update it, and click on Update. And what will happen here is now the Synology is going to pull down the latest version. What I'm finding, and I might be wrong about this, is that if you don't do it this way, just rebuilding with the compose file won't pull down the new one. It looks locally first before it goes to the internet to get another one. So I found that I've got to update it here and then run the build to get it up to date. So what I'm going to let this do real quick here is finish downloading the new version of RSS Hub from the internet, and then I'll show you how to start things back up again. So let's give this a second to download, and we'll be right back. All right, so now you can see that RSS Hub is on the latest version. Some of these update quite frequently, so you want to come back in and take a look every once in a while. They're not going to update automatically. I'm going to jump back up here to Project. You can see RSS Hub is still off, but now what I'm going to do is select it and go to Build in the Action menu here. And you can see here it recreated RSS Hub 1 because we downloaded a new container file, but it will basically pick up right where it left off because all the files, again, are stored outside of where that container is located. So it'll go through the process here. The exit code is 0. We should have a green light next to RSS Hub, and it is back up and running again. So that's the upgrade process. Now, if you're looking for some starting points, a great one is the awesome self-hosted list up on GitHub. They've got hundreds of these self-hosted projects here, as you can see, all very neatly organized. So you can spend a lot of time just browsing through what some of your options are. And there's often multiple solutions for each problem that you're trying to resolve. Some of these things are a lot easier to work with than others, and part of the fun, for me at least, has been trying different projects out to see what works best. A couple of weeks ago, we did a video about the RSS reader I'm using for some of my YouTube subscriptions, and I went through Awesome Self-Hosted to pull down every open source RSS reader project there was to find one that worked best for me. So this is a great place to poke around. Another great resource, because you're going to really get into this once you start figuring things out, is the Self-Hosted Podcast. This is run by Alex and Chris here. They do a new episode every week or so, and they have some great suggestions, great tips, and just about every week they've got some new project they're playing with that I end up installing and integrating into my workflow. So Wallabag was something I learned about on their podcast, and here we are right now doing this video. Another great resource is the Reddit self-hosted page here, the subreddit, and that's r/self-hosted. And here you can communicate with other folks and also search on prior problems, because in most cases, the problem you're having was experienced by somebody else, and you can get a good answer through the subreddit. So those are 3 good places to start, and I would welcome any suggestions from you all as to the resources that you're using for your home lab. Now, the one that gave me the most trouble installing on my Synology NAS was PeerTube. And what PeerTube is basically an open source federated video platform that works a lot like YouTube does. And what I've been doing with this is just very quietly archiving my channel into this thing so that in case I ever get kicked off of YouTube, all of my content will live on and I can figure out some way of getting this stuff out to all of you again. And it has a lot of the features that YouTube has. It's really pretty amazing, and it can federate a lot like Mastodon does. And one of the things that I love about this resurgence of self-hosted projects is that these projects are really good and very, very close to the cloud and commercial competitors. And I'm hoping at some point we get away from all this platform stuff and get back to how things used to work, where you had a bunch of servers on the internet all interconnecting with each other the way it was supposed to kind of be done in the first place. And PeerTube, as you can see, has no less than 6 different containers that it operates with, and it's quite a heavy lift to get it up and running, but I was very proud of getting that functional. So I've got just a lot of fun stuff that I've been doing here. I wanted to share this progress with you. And again, every one of these Docker projects are going to be different, but I think what we experience with the Wallabag thing here is very similar to the kinds of experiences you'll have with some of these other containers. Let me know what you're running down in the comments below, and until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Chris Allegretta, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Logic KGR, Tom Albrecht, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.